There is a specific heavy silence that falls over the king's private study when the actual architecture of the state is being permanently altered. Camilla walked into the room fully expecting to witness the ultimate validation of her 30-year campaign. King Charles placing his signature on a newly drafted constitutional directive that would effectively crown her as the shadow regent of the United Kingdom. She expected the cabinet secretary to hand her the master copy, legally anchoring her authority over the Prince of Wales during the sovereign's highly scrutinised twilight years. Instead, she stepped across the threshold to find a devastatingly quiet tableau. Prince William was already standing beside his father's desk, holding a freshly sealed, undeniably finalised set of letters patent. As the king deliberately capped his fountain pen and avoided his wife's gaze, the excruciating truth settled in. Camilla had not walked in to claim her ultimate executive power. She had arrived just in time to witness the silent, legally binding coronation of her stepson. This video will unpack the unprecedented constitutional overreach the Queen Consort quietly attempted under the guise of protecting an ailing monarch. How Prince William intercepted this staggering exploitation of executive vulnerability and the ruthless legal retaliation that followed. We will examine exactly how the unyielding machinery of the Privy Council was weaponized to execute a flawless transfer of true operational power, leading to Camilla's chilling realization that despite the historic jewels resting on her head, she has just been permanently legally classified as a constitutional irrelevance. To comprehend the sheer magnitude of this institutional purge, one must first understand the absolute, unassailable confidence Camilla radiated over the past few years. She had mastered the delicate, unforgiving art of imperial attrition. She survived the intense public fury of the 1990s, methodically outlasted the hostility of the old aristocratic guard, and watched the total institutional erasure of Princess Diana's legacy within the palace walls. She slowly and carefully replaced the ghosts of the past with her own loyal courtiers, creating a protective echo chamber around the king. By the time she was crowned at Westminster Abbey, the illusion of her supremacy was entirely complete. She believed that the institution had finally surrendered to her endurance, and that she was the absolute unquestionable gatekeeper to the sovereign. In her mind, she had successfully transitioned from being a highly controversial spouse to becoming the indispensable architect of the modern monarchy. The magnificent staterooms felt like her personal dominion, and the king's deeply ingrained emotional reliance on her felt like an impenetrable shield against any future marginalization. This is the profound danger of confusing a monarch's personal affection with actual constitutional authority. Camilla began to operate under the incredibly dangerous assumption that the entire executive machinery of the British government was now permanently structured around her comfort, her commands, and her post-reign survival. She expected the core blood royals to quietly submit to her administrative maneuvers, assuming they were either too exhausted by public scrutiny or too afraid of upsetting the fragile king to challenge her behind the scenes. The catalyst for this unseen constitutional crisis emerged just weeks ago, hidden far beneath the surface of routine state management. As the king's medical treatments necessitated a subtle but undeniable reduction in his physical participation in state affairs, a massive power vacuum opened within the palace ecosystem, Camilla recognized a stark, uncomfortable reality. Her own constitutional weight is an illusion that evaporates entirely the moment her husband's reign concludes, driven by a deep-seated commercial desperation and the terrifying prospect of being stripped of her influence by a future King William. Her private office quietly initiated a highly sophisticated maneuver known within elite political circles as the Sovereign Proxy Directive. Working entirely behind the velvet ropes and bypassing the Central Royal Secretariat, Camilla's team drafted a sweeping administrative proposal aimed directly at the Cabinet Office. Citing the immediate need to protect the king from exhaustion and to ensure seamless continuity of state business, the paperwork formally requested that the Queen Consort be granted unprecedented co-executive clearance. The directive was designed to mandate that all high-level government briefings, intelligence summaries, and domestic policy decisions pass through her private office for review before reaching the king. More insidiously, it contained clauses that would give her effective veto power over the daily state duties normally delegated to the Prince of Wales. Camilla was attempting to insert herself as the absolute, unavoidable bottleneck of the British government. She assumed absolute compliance from the state apparatus. She believed that by framing this staggering overreach as the devotion of a caring wife simply managing her husband's stressful workload, The constitutional advisors would quietly rubber stamp the new protocols without daring to cause a scene. She was attempting to use the geopolitical vulnerability of the crown to weave herself so deeply into the executive fabric of the state that she could never be removed, essentially establishing a shadow regency that would completely paralyze William's ability to govern. But she profoundly underestimated Prince William and the unforgiving, cold-blooded machinery of British constitutional law. This is where the story shifts from a tale of blind territorial ambition to a forensic institutional discovery. William is no longer just a grieving son navigating family politics. As the Prince of Wales and the Duke of Cornwall, he is the active, legally appointed regulator of the institution's continuity. He approaches the architecture of the monarchy with the ruthless, data-driven discipline of a modern statesman. Furthermore, William has spent his entire life watching the true integrity of the crown be threatened by external manipulation, and he has sworn a silent, ironclad oath that the executive functions of the state will never be hijacked for private ego. When the automated legal audits of the Cabinet Office flagged the Sovereign Proxy Directive, the paper trail immediately unravelled across William's desk. The Prince of Wales recognised the manoeuvre not as a harmless logistical request, but as a direct, unacceptable threat to the structural integrity of the Windsor Line. It was an attempt by an unelected non-blood royal to absorb the actual geopolitical power of the state. The core royals did not launch a dramatic family confrontation. William did not scream at Camilla in the grand hallways of Buckingham Palace. Nor did he leak angry tirades to the tabloid press. He operated with a devastatingly analytical and emotionally intelligent restraint. William went directly to the master constitutional architecture of the state, quietly convening an emergency session with the highest-ranking members of the Privy Council and the Cabinet Secretary. He realized that the greatest weakness of Camilla's strategy is that she possesses absolutely no inherent legal right to govern. Every ounce of her power is borrowed. Utilizing his absolute legal leverage as the direct heir, William engineered a brilliant silent execution of revenge. He completely bypassed the Queen Consort's office and moved to permanently amputate her political ambitions through the unfeeling application of constitutional law. Working with the highest legal minds in the country, William drafted a countermeasure of staggering institutional weight. Rather than simply vetoing Camilla's request, he initiated a formal, legally binding transfer of executive operational control directly to his own office. The newly drafted letters patent officially designated the Prince of Wales as the primary steward of all active sovereign duties, effectively establishing a working regency in all but name, while keeping the king as the ceremonial head. The legal loophole Camilla had spent months trying to pry open was welded shut in a single afternoon to truly neutralize the illusion of her power. William engineered a psychological humiliation so deep that it would shatter her authority without a single raised voice. He allowed Camilla's scheduled meeting with the king to remain on the diary. He allowed her to walk down the corridor, fully believing she was about to be crowned the ultimate political gatekeeper of the realm. He ensured the trap was perfectly set, waiting for the precise moment she crossed the threshold to spring it shut. Which brings us back to that freezing moment in the king's private study. Camilla, confident that her shadow regency was secured, stepped into the room expecting absolute deference from the state officials. Instead, she found herself walking into a completed constitutional handover. As she stared at the closed red dispatch boxes and looked at Prince William holding the master legal documents that officially transferred the operational weight of the kingdom onto his shoulders. The visual humiliation was absolute. In front of the highest officials of the land, Camilla realized that William had just used the rigid architecture of the state to legally box her out of the government forever. She had spent 30 years trying to conquer the family, but she had just crashed headfirst into the unbreakable wall of the Constitution. She realized that she was standing in the very epicenter of global power, entirely stripped of leverage, forced to watch her stepson quietly and ruthlessly take control of the empire she thought she owned. The heavy silence inside the king's private study did not merely signify a temporary administrative disagreement. It was the sound of a 30-year public relations empire permanently fracturing against the unyielding architecture of the British Constitution. As the senior state officials quietly gathered their documents and exited the room, leaving the family capsule entirely isolated, Camilla turned her gaze toward King Charles. The visual humiliation of the completed letters pattern was burning hot, and she expected the immediate defensive roar that had historically shielded her from the consequences of her ambition. She demanded that her husband manually override the directive that he assert his absolute sovereign prerogative, and that he instantly dismantle the legal blockade Prince William had just executed. She expected the man who had torn the British establishment apart to legitimise her presence to finally stand up and protect her pride. Instead, she was met with a devastating, heavy silence. The king simply looked down at the freshly signed documents on his desk, adjusted his cuffs, and offered a quietly profound refusal. He did absolutely nothing. This unanswered plea was the true psychological climax of her entire royal existence. For decades, Camilla had operated under the absolute certainty that Charles would always prioritise her status over the rigid demands of the institution. But a monarch in the twilight of his reign operates under a completely different set of structural laws. Charles looked at the meticulous ironclad legal handover executed by the Prince of Wales, and he recognised the harsh arithmetic of his position. To overturn William's Regency directive would mean declaring an open, highly destabilising war against his own heir and the entire Privy Council, triggering an unsustainable constitutional crisis just to soothe his wife's political vanity. In that freezing, unspoken moment, the king made a cold sovereign calculation. He chose the institutional survival of the crown over Camilla. That deafening silence forced the Queen Consort to confront a freezing reality she had successfully ignored since the coronation. The profound commercial and structural desperation of her actual position. Why was her private office so frantic to secure the sovereign Proxy Directive? Why did she attempt to intercept the state intelligence summaries and insert herself as the ultimate bottleneck of the government? Because behind the glittering public relations facade and the magnificent trappings of ultimate majesty lies a stark, entirely dependent reality. Legally, structurally, and financially, a Queen Consort owns absolutely nothing within the royal infrastructure. She possesses no royal blood. She does not own the historic palaces. She controls no sovereign wealth. Every privilege she enjoys, from the state vehicles she rides in to the very roof over her head, is a leased asset entirely dependent on her husband's continued survival. The secret directive was her desperate attempt to manufacture actual, untouchable political leverage that would survive the conclusion of the current reign. She fundamentally understands that the moment Charles's reign ends, her constitutional relevance vanishes overnight, leaving her territorially and administratively homeless. By trying to weave her private office into the executive fabric of the British government, she hoped to become so deeply embedded in the machinery of state that the next monarch could never truly marginalise her. She was frantically attempting to buy her family a permanent, highly influential seat at the table of global power. But Prince William's ruthless administrative retaliation exposed the absolute emptiness of her title. By invoking the rigid laws of succession and securing the operational control of the national diary, William legally amputated her from the true power centre of the monarchy, leaving her as a purely ceremonial figurehead entirely reliant on the goodwill of a stepson whose mother's legacy she spent her life trying to navigate around. This frantic scrambling for relevance stands in devastating contrast to the quiet, undeniable ascension of Catherine, Princess of Wales. While Camilla desperately manipulates administrative channels and drafts secret proposals to artificially validate her authority, Catherine operates with the supreme confidence of absolute inevitability. The Princess of Wales does not need to broker backroom deals with cabinet ministers or hijack the sovereign's executive duties because she is the future of the state itself. Despite facing immense personal trials and enduring profound public scrutiny over the past year, Catherine has never demanded political concessions or attempted to absorb state powers for her own ego. She rests securely in her role, embodying the exact uncomplaining sacrifice and institutional dignity that the crown demands. William has ensured that the protective dome over his family is completely impenetrable, leaving the desperate manoeuvring of the Queen Consort entirely suffocated by protocol. The subtle shifts occurring within the palace corridors are now impossible to ignore. In the aristocratic world, a rearranged briefing table, a removed chair, and a silently amended constitutional document are never mere logistical accidents. They are broadcasted messages regarding the massive permanent transfer of true power. The courtiers, the private secretaries, and the government liaisons who once rushed to accommodate Camilla's every preference are now actively reading the room. They see the Prince of Wales running the high-level briefings with the highest officials of the land. They see the historic apparatus of the state turning its back on the Queen Consort's office. The institutional machinery is looking past the current fading reign and quietly, permanently aligning its absolute loyalties with William and Catherine. This is the ultimate tragic culmination of Camilla's 30-year game. She won the long, bitter war of attrition to wear the crown, surviving public outrage and historical resistance. But she is discovering that the crown is simply a piece of jewelry when it is stripped of the kingdom's heavy machinery. She is surrounded by the sparkling trappings of ultimate majesty. Yet she has just been officially categorized as a constitutional liability by the very institution she sought to rule. She has definitively, permanently lost the war for true power. When the inevitable transition of the reign finally arrives, she will not dictate the terms of the state. She will be relegated to the margins of history, sitting in a magnificent but empty room, holding a title that carries absolutely no geopolitical weight, waiting for intelligence briefings and state meetings that will never arrive. The grand illusion has finally dissolved, and the house always wins. If you found this forensic look into the hidden constitutional power dynamics of the royal family insightful, make sure to subscribe and leave a comment below. Let me know your thoughts on Prince William stepping up to secure the executive continuity of the crown. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next analysis.